Initiation by Robert Hugh Benson. Subsection 4. He awoke that afternoon a little before 4, and lay well content enough, feeling remarkably light and cheerful. It was as if the sleep had purged his brain of those flying shreds of impatience and resentment that had troubled him for the first few hours after his return to consciousness, and that had manifested themselves even once or twice during the surgeon's visit this morning. Aunt Anna was to come about 4:30, and he was glad to have a little while to arrange, both in thought and word, what he had to say to her. A number of new and rather surprising ideas had come to him during the last 24 hours, and particularly during the long night until he had slept at last in the dawn. He felt even a kind of pleasure in the prospect of the humiliating confession he would have to make. Then there were various plans he wished to speak to her about, or rather, he wished to consult her as to the plans that had best be formed for the carrying out of his future ideas. For one thing, at any rate, had come to him very insistently. Now that he was emerging from his new experience and looked forward to life once more, that he must really be rather more definite. It was pleasant enough to dawdle at Hartley and play tennis and ride with Jim, and hunt and shoot and all the rest of it, but this was not exactly life itself. He must do something. He was not sure whether it would be Parliament or agriculture, but it must be something. Marriage, of course, might come some day, he prudently reminded himself. Not indeed such a marriage as that of which he had once dreamed, but at any rate a decent and Christian matrimony. However, that must take care of itself. Meantime, he must look out for some definite line. It was pleasant to think that Aunt Anna and Jim would form the domestic background to this new-born strenuousness. She came in so quietly and naturally that he was almost taken aback. The nurse, who had looked in soon after he awoke, and gone out again saying that she would bring up tea for Mrs. Fanning as soon as she arrived, merely tapped on the door and then opened it, and Aunt Anna came in. She came straight up to the bed, smiling, with bright eyes. She looked marvellously young and pretty. It was almost impossible to remember that really her hair was not powdered. "My dear boy," she said. She made as if she would kiss him, but as she reached him she hesitated. Then she took his hand instead and kissed that. "Well, here we are, Aunt Anna," said Neville. "Sit down where I can see you. And for goodness sake, don't touch the bed or I shall scream." As she sat down, very close to the bed, and facing him again, the door was pushed open, and Nurse Deacon came in with the tray. There was a soft bustle as Aunt Anna cleared a little table and put it before her. "You may have tea?" asked Aunt Anna. "Certainly," said Neville, "but I think it mustn't be strong." It was delicious to watch her as she poured it out and noiselessly moved things this way and that, finally putting his cup and a plate of rusks within his reach. He was perfectly able to help himself when once he had been properly arranged. "Just tell me all the news first," said Neville. She drank her cup straight off and set it down. "No, I won't have anything to eat," she said. "Well, the news." Certainly she seemed a little agitated, but that was only natural, thought Neville. "Yes, the news," he said again. "All about what you did yesterday, and Algie and Charlson and everything. I haven't seen Charlson for 2 days. They won't let him come up, you know." "Ah, yes," she said. "Well, I got here about 9 yesterday, and had a word or two with Sir Arthur Hansworth. Then they sent down to say you had taken the anaesthetic splendidly. Then I heard that the operation was over, and I went into St. Joseph's. But you saw Hansworth, didn't you?" She appeared to recover herself with a kind of jerk. "Oh, yes, I saw him, and he gave me the news." "He told me so this morning," observed Neville. "Go on." "In the afternoon we inquired again, and the same at night, about 10. I sent a note round to Mrs. Bessington, you know. Yes, I heard she had come. I thought you wouldn't mind. Mr. Lennox dined with me. Then, this morning, when I came, I heard that perhaps I should be allowed to see you this afternoon." She was speaking very quietly and rather rapidly, as if she were controlling herself with great success. Neville was interested to observe that self-control was necessary for her. It touched him considerably to see that she was, plainly, so much agitated and moved by what was, after all, a comparatively uneventful operation. Of course, the whole thing was itself an event, but within those brackets, all had been really very smooth and successful. Well, that's all your news? I think so. He put down his cup and settled himself a little lower in bed. I've got a heap to say, he said. Just give me a cigarette. I can manage a whole one, I think. Thanks. And a match. She held the match while he lighted up. He drew 1 or 2 whiffs and then began. Yes, I've got a heap to say. You won't think me a prig, will you, or sentimental, will you? My dear, because I really do think it's true. Of course, it may just be a reaction, but, well, I don't think it is. I've been thinking a lot, Aunt Anna. Yes, my dear. I've been a smug beast. That's the beginning. Did I ever tell you about the Pietà at Frascati? I don't think so. Well, she and I saw it together, you know. Enid, I mean. He saw her catch her lower lip in her teeth for an instant. She looked a little pale, too, he noticed. Oh no, he said, thinking that he understood. That's all over. It's not about her. At least not much. It began with the Pietà. We both said we couldn't bear it. She nodded. Her face was set in a kind of rigid attention. You know what I mean, suffering and all that. It didn't seem to fit. It seemed morbid and all that. Well, I don't think that anymore now. This time she did not even nod, but her whole intense air assented. She seemed waiting for the same denouement. It began when Enid threw me over, he went on, closing his eyes for a moment or two. It was awful. Well, I did the wrong thing. I see that now. I might have run amok. I see that now. But that wasn't really much temptation. But I did what was very nearly as bad. I deliberately turned my back. I would not suffer. So I turned to other things, and I rode, and I played the fool, and I bathed with Jim, and I tried to say to myself that I'd just be an animal, a pagan. Oh, a decent sort of animal. I honestly don't think I could be the other. And then I found that I couldn't. He looked up at her again, and her attentiveness seemed even deepened. She was looking at him with an extraordinary kind of strain in her face, as if watching some process of which she knew the end. She did not even shift her eyes when they met his. It was as if she was looking at a picture. It was almost painful so to be stared at. Again he closed his eyes. He was feeling rather exhausted again. He would make haste and finish. I couldn't, because God would not allow it. I'm trying to tell you simply, my dear. Don't think me a prig, please. First of all came the blindness. That set me thinking. That and the pain. I did have headaches, you know, besides, that I wouldn't tell you about. Then came what Hansworth said to me. That startled me. About my father, I mean. And then came the operation. My dear, I'm a born coward. I loathed it. He opened his eyes once more. She was leaning back in her chair. Her elbow was on the tea table, and her hand shaded her face. Well, it was easier so. But I didn't see it all till yesterday, and last night. I couldn't sleep, you know. I thought and thought, and I don't want to whine, you know, but the pain has been sickening. Well, I believe I see the point now. He wouldn't let me alone. First Enid, and then when I tried the other, pain. I give in, Aunt Anna. I don't want to run away anymore. Well, to put it in 5 words, I don't hate the Pietà anymore. I see the point. It must be there. Bang in the middle of the woods, too. It's everywhere, you know. There's no getting away, so one may as well accept it. He looked at her again, himself moved very deeply. It had cost him a good deal to say it, but she, apparently, was even more affected. He had heard no sound, but she was wheeled about in her chair, and her face was hidden altogether in both her hands. My dear, I'm sorry, but I've done, that's all. At least, that's all about that part. You understand, don't you?" He saw her bow her head in assent, but she didn't show her face. "There's one more thing, and then we'll talk about something else. I've been dawdling frightfully, you know. I've done nothing whatever. Now that simply won't do, and I want you to tell me what's the best thing, when once I'm back at Hartley." Then she lifted her face, and he saw a look in it that he had never seen before. It was expectancy still, but it was more. "Oh, no, I don't want to do anything sensational, you know. I'm not going to be fanatical or anything like that, but I must do something. It may be Parliament, or it may be..." He stopped dead. "What's the matter? Why do you look like that?" Was it the pressure of her hands on her face, or was it some strange effect of the half-light coming through the thin silk curtains? She rose as he looked and slid forward onto her knees. He winced a little as her hands came down on his own right hand that lay outside the coverlet. "My dear," she said, "I am sure you can do a great deal." Her voice too was strange. It had neither tears nor laughter in it, but there was an extraordinary tone in every word. Her face too was tense and exalted, yet without even a touch of hysteria. "You can do a great deal. It is for this that all this has happened. Neville, my dear boy." She was holding his hand firmly and tenderly. He said nothing. "Neville, my dear, you know what you made me promise? That the doctor should say nothing to me that I didn't say to you. Well, I have his leave. He has commissioned me." "Is it cancer?" he whispered sharply. "No, my dear, it is not cancer. He has told you the truth too, but he has not told you the whole truth. My darling, you won't be afraid. I know that. You have been splendid, splendid. He has done what he could, you know, and now your real work must begin. We are Christians. That is why he has allowed me to tell you so soon." Over his whole body he felt the light sweat break out, like 10,000 delicate needle points touching his skin. A solemn deep pulse began to beat at the base of his throat, a light film passed over his eyes, and all that he looked at, her face, the screen by the door, the coverlet on which lay his hand enfolded in hers, all these things appeared to swim a little, and then seethe as if in granulation. "We are Christians, you and I," said Aunt Anna. "There is nothing at all to fear. You had the sacraments. I know that, before you knew. There is nothing to fear. Tell me. You will be able to see till the end, they hope. But they are not sure, though he removed most of the... But he could not remove it all. It must grow again, and... How long?" he whispered. 3 or 4 months at the most," whispered Aunt Anna. Subsection 5. There was no sound at all in the room as she bowed again her face upon her hands, and then, opening them, rested her lips upon his fingers. Out of the far distance, checked and muffled by the intervening houses, came the moan of a siren, died again, rose again, and was silent. The coals in the grate fell inwards with a soft crash. When she lifted her eyes again, he was lying quite still. He had raised himself a little in bed, as he asked how long, and she had felt him sink back once more as she had answered. Now he was quiet again, with his eyes open and looking out beyond the end of his bed, as if he were thinking gently. She did not speak. She understood something of that strange alchemy of the mind, which requires time that a new and unexpected element may be allowed to sink gently down and be assimilated. It was not yet sunk in, but he knew what she had said. But he did not yet know that he knew it. He was quite pale. His lips were slightly parted, but there was no reaction of shock or of alarm. He was taking it in gently, as his manner was. She had formed no plan as to how she was to tell him. She herself had known it, down below there in the drawing-room, as soon as she had seen the surgeon's face when he had come down from his business. He had told her gently and kindly, just so much and no more as she had told Neville just now. She had tried to frame some form of words by which she in turn might tell him, and had given it up. She must wait till she saw him. Then she would know. The surgeon had at first utterly forbidden her to tell him for at least a week. She had answered that when she could not face him at all. She had said that Catholics were not like other people, that death was not to them as it was to others. He had consented at last, for she would not hear the proposal that anyone but herself should tell him. It was from her lips, and hers only, that he must learn it. He had consented at last, or rather had withdrawn his absolute prohibition, but he was emphatic that he did not formally sanction it, and that she must bear the responsibility. Well, she had done it, and Neville lay here silent, meditating. There came a tap at the door. That must be the nurse coming to take her away. At the sound, he moved his eyes and looked at her, and somehow the expression in his face was not quite what she had expected. Aunt Anna. Yes, my darling. Aunt Anna. He hesitated. I see what you meant just now when you said that about my work. I'll try. Give me a kiss. But even the tone of his voice was disconcerting. Had he then not quite understood?